Hey Buns, today I am so excited to finally show you this first look at Reaper from the Endwalker Media Tour. Now keep in mind this is pre-release footage and everything is subject to change before launch. Potencies too are not to be trusted, therefore this is not and cannot be a guide, but it's more of an overview of just how everything works, how the different spells work together. Soul harvesting and you, basically. First off, let's take a look at your job gauge. So the red bar here is your soul gauge, and you can think of charging up as like step 1 in the process. So you fill up the red bar with your basic 1, 2, 3 combo, that's slice into waxing slash into infernal slice, and as you can see in their tooltips, yes, they all add delicious soul gauge. If you are facing multiple enemies, you want to use your area effect combo, that's spinning scythe into nightmare scythe. That will also charge up that soul gauge for you. Now you also have a couple of extra buttons to fill up the red bar quicker. Soul slice gives you 50 soul gauge on a 30-second recast with 2 charges on it, and the AoE version is soul scythe. Same deal, just AoE, and these two do share a recast timer, so you gotta pick one or the other depending on the situation. One other way that you can get some of that juicy red bar soul gauge is with the button Shadow of Death or Whirl of Death. Whirl of Death. Now these put a very important debuff on your target that you want this up at all times on anything that you're fighting. Shadow of Death is the single target version. Basically the debuff is death design, and it makes it so you and only you do more damage to that target. Whirl of Death, like I said, that's just the AoE version. Keep that up at all times. It's very important. You can see in my footage of playing Reaper, I pretty much never have it up, but don't worry about what I'm doing. Do as I say, not as I do. Okay, so once you got some of that red soul gauge filled up, what is it for? Well, it's to summon a bloodthirsty void scent to come and claw your enemy's eyes out, which is step 2 of the process, spending the soul gauge. So gluttony costs 50 soul gauge. It's on a 60-second cooldown, and the gluttonous one is of course your avatar who appears out of nowhere, gobbles up 50 of your soul gauge, does little damage, and importantly gives you a soul reaver buff. It sets your soul reaver buff to 2 charges. Now, it's kind of like a friendship buff because it seems to appear every time you summon the avatar to like claw at somebody, but I'll explain more about soul reaver in a second. Bloodstalk costs 50 soul gauge, and it summons the avatar to attack people too, and it sets your soul reaver friendship buff to 1. Now Bloodstalk will change to other buttons depending on where you are in your rotation, but we'll get to that in a second. Don't worry about that yet. Grim Swath is the 50 soul gauge costing AoE version of Bloodstalk. So that also changes to another button later, and we will come back to that too. So using up these soul reaver stacks, friendship stacks I've been calling them, takes us to step 3 in our rotation. Now, the Soul Reaver lets us use Gibbot, Gallows, and Guillotine. That's the 3 pretty blue buttons on your bar, and they also charge up the pretty blue bar on your job gauge. That is the Shroud bar. So 2 of these are for the single target and have positionals. That's Gibbot is for the flank, and Gallows is for the butt, and Guillotine is for just doing AoE. So if we use a charge of Soul Reaver to use Gibbot, for example, we'll get a few different things. We'll get 10 of the blue Shroud gauge, and we'll get a buff that enhances Gallows. That's called Enhanced Gallows. It's very creative. Gallows does pretty much the same thing, except it will give you Enhanced Gibbot. So they want you to press Gallows and then Gibbot, go back and forth, flank to side, pretty much like that. Now, if you have up either buff, Enhanced Gallows or Enhanced Gibbot, then Bloodstalk, the one we talked about a second ago, will change into Unveiled Gallows or Unveiled Gibbot, respectively. And that sounds like a lot to remember, but don't stress, because Bloodstalk, Unveiled Gallows, and Unveiled Gibbot all do the exact same thing. They cost 50 red soul gauge, and they set your Soul Reaver stacks to 1. To recap, we 1, 2, 3 combo, get our red soul gauge. We spend our soul gauge on things like Bloodstalk, which will give us the Soul Reaver stacks. Then we use those stacks to cast Gibbot, Gallows, or Guillotine, which will in turn give us the blue Shroud gauge. Now, there is another pretty important way to get Shroud gauge, and that is with the Arcane Circle. So on a 120-second cooldown, you can buff up your party's damage for 20 seconds, give you and your party a Circle of Sacrifice buff for 5 seconds, and you give Bloodstone Circle buff to yourself. So what happens here is Circle of Sacrifice means that anytime you or your party members successfully land a weapon skill or cast a spell, then the Reaper who applied it, that's you, may be granted a stack of Immortal Sacrifice up to a maximum of 8 stacks. And Bloodstone Circle, it just allows you to get these Immortal Sacrifice stacks. Now, what is Immortal Sacrifice for? It is for one thing, and that is Plentiful Harvest, which is your level 88 skill. It costs 1 Immortal Sacrifice stack, and it does a super cool line attack, and it also increases your blue shroud gauge by 50. And so you can only do this one time per time you cast Arcane Circle, but it's super cool and good. So what is all that blue shroud gauge for? Well, only the most metal skill in your whole kit, which is Enshroud. So for 50 shroud, you can offer your flesh as a vessel to your avatar, gaining maximum stacks of something called Lemur Shroud. Now, Lemur Shrouds are these fiery blue balls on your job gauge. This is the death gauge part of your job gauge. So yes, finally, after all this building and spending, you finally have blue balls and are almost ready to finish your rotation. So Enshroud lasts for 30 seconds, and you can see it ticking down there on the death gauge, and that is just how much time you have left to play host to your avatar. Now, you can use these blue balls, that is Lemur Shroud, to cast cool spells like Void Reaping, which is upgraded Gibbot, Cross Reaping, which is an upgraded Gallows, and Grim Reaping, which is the upgraded Guillotine. And all of those cost 1 blue ball. Bloodstalk, on the other hand, becomes Lemur's Slice, and Grim Swath becomes Lemur's Scythe. And those each cost 2 blue balls. So using any of these new shiny buttons will get rid of those blue balls. Lemur Shroud balls become Void Shroud balls, is what I'm trying to say, all used up. And finally, you will have an access to the very cool level 90 skill, which is Communio, which is your big climax finale. It does a ton of damage and just ends your avatar hosting experience. But wait, there's more. So I talked about Shadow of Death, World of Death, gotta have that up all the time, unless you're me, but I'll work on that. Okay, I'm gonna work on that. There's Harp, which is a short cast time ranged attack, but there's a trick to it, which is involved with the other buttons called Hell's Egress and Hell's Ingress. Now, this is super cool. You can basically choose if you want to teleport forward, or maybe you want to teleport back, and you'll leave behind a portal where you started that you can teleport back to. It lasts for 10 seconds, after which point the portal fades. So within that 10 seconds, you need to decide like if you want to use the portal or not. And after you've done that, after you press one of those buttons, it will give you the enhanced harp buff, which just makes your next harp instant cast. You could teleport quick back. Do that. Harp, or I don't know why I'm doing a gun. Pull out your gun. Whatever harp is. Harp. And it's cool. That's all I have to say about that. Now, Arcane Crest is a little shield you can give yourself on a 30-second recast, which nullifies damage up to 10% of your maximum HP for 5 seconds. It also grants Crest of Time returned to yourself and nearby party members within a radius of 15 yalms when the barrier is completely absorbed. So whenever that barrier breaks, then it gives everybody a hot on them for 15 seconds. And finally, Soul Sow is what you use pre-pool to give yourself a buff that lets you cast Harvest Moon. So because the cast time for Soul Sow is instant outside of combat, so it's clearly intended for you to do during pre-pool. And Harvest Moon is pretty good AoE with 25 Yalm range on it. Okay, so this was kind of a quick and dirty overview of how Reaper works. I absolutely love this job, and I feel like explaining it makes it sound a lot more complicated than it actually is. I feel like if you actually sit down and play it, you will just feel like you're thinking, like I was just thinking to myself, okay, red bar, and now I have stacks, and now I press the button that gives me blue bar, and now I need, like, that's it. Like I wasn't like thinking, I wasn't hurting myself trying to figure out how this worked. You don't have to memorize like all of it. Like you will learn it as you play it. I think I really felt like it was very, very intuitive. I do want to remind everyone yet again that this is development footage and everything is subject to change. None of this is set in stone. Potencies are not final, so like don't get your panties into twists yet about anything you've seen or heard here yet. And definitely, I wouldn't take any guides too seriously at this time. But it's just fun to see how everything works. And I can tell you from my experience that I have loved Reaper. And I certainly hope that you will give it a try. If you like this video, please consider supporting the channel on Patreon or on Twitch. You can also support the channel for free just by clicking that subscribe button or by sharing this video with your fellow Warriors of Light. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.